Thanks to you all for turning up tonight for this one. This is a self-contained lecture, however, it definitely does form a complement to two previous presentations that I've done this year, one of which was the obvious occult battle of Britain Beyond Fortune material, and the other one was the distinctly 18 certificate presentation that I gave for this group, Southend Glastonbury Promotion Ground Mandala. If you heard those, there's a certain amount of follow through with this, but this is complete in itself. Okay, so especially in Glastonbury, we're getting a sense of what many people have had a slight awareness of for a while now. At least for the last 30 years or so, since the Indiana Jones movies really kicked in, that there might have been an occult dimension to the Second World War, that there is such a thing as Nazi occultism. And these two old chestnuts, the Morning of Magicians and the Spear of Destiny, set many people off on the path of investigating those topics. And as I mentioned in my presentation earlier on in the year, heaven help you if you are still relying on these books for any information, because they are shot full of holes. An awful lot of it is a complete load of nonsense. But in the midst of all the material that's presented here, there is this sense of an Eastern connection. You know, Nazis going to Tibet to seek the hidden masters, the vibe of Blavatsky and Theosophy is there. It's certainly true, we know, that her material on the root races, the Aryan root race and its symbol, the swastika, did inspire some of the German mystics of the first decade of the last century, the Ariosophists. So somewhere in all this there's a kind of unfavourable sense of the Eastern connection. There are all these stories, you get in Morning of Magicians and so on, 1,000 Tibetan corpses in German uniform in the ruins of Berlin at the end of the war. I have never found anything to back this up at all. I don't actually believe that in the slightest. In the Spear of Destiny as well, there's a sense that the mystical hidden kingdoms of Central Asia, Agartha, Shambhala, are in fact, corrupt and evil, and that the Nazi connection with them in some way intensified their power and their evil. So there's a sense that maybe the Eastern mystics were with Hitler. What we do know at least is that there were some of the people that were fighting for the independence of India against Britain did side with the Japanese. We at least know that. But this gives a partial and misleading picture, which I hope to rectify tonight in some way. There are little things that lead us into this, and I've given this presentation on a number of occasions, but it was very interesting the way it played out yesterday when I got my notes out, because I found that somebody had posted something on Facebook about this very book, and we came to realise together that yesterday was the anniversary of the death in Dachau concentration camp of a very remarkable woman indeed, because Nora Nisa Inyat Khan was the daughter of Hazrat Inyat Khan, the founder of the Sufi order in the West, a most remarkable and cultured individual, chap who visited Glastonbury on one occasion actually and proclaimed the Chalice Book as being one of the holiest sites on the planet Earth. His daughter was brought up in an incredibly cultured environment. As she's learned to play the Veena, she was brought up in Russia and then after the revolution in France and in Britain, educated at the Sorbonne and so forth. After the fall of France, she volunteered to be a kind of a spy behind enemy lines, operating radio and so on for the French resistance. And ultimately she was betrayed, she was sent to Dachau, and she was executed there. And there's a memorial in a park in London to her. She's quite famous. And to have a sense of the sensibilities of the family that she came from, the beliefs that she represented, very much a sense of the universal brotherhood of humanity in the best sense of the term. now move into the realms of the increasingly weird, because this is Narayan Maharaj. Now, he's not that well known anymore these days. He was, in his time, in the first half of the 20th century, quite a big deal. And the style in which he conducted himself, the way in which he lived, was on one level extravagant to the absolute max. Incredibly elaborate ceremonials, pujas. You know, he had a silver throne that had been given to him by the King of Nepal. He would carry out these really detailed, archaic ceremonials to obscure Indian deities with meticulous attention to detail. And there would be, you know, anything up to 10,000 people would turn up for these events, and he would feed them all, and all the rest of it. So there are also a whole bunch of peculiar, the usual paranormal stories that you get associated with Indian gurus. I'm not going to really go into too much of that. You know, he dressed himself up with the markings of Shiva sometimes, and sometimes with the markings of Krishna. He's a funny looking guy, you know, there's no question about that. But what's interesting about him from the point of view of tonight is that as the war broke out, he became obsessive about following the details of what was going on. He would still carry on the everyday life of the large ashram that he'd set up around himself, but he would be listening intently on the radio. He would have all maps laid out in front of him. He'd be looking at what was happening where, and mysterious wounds would start to appear on his body. And this was apparently all part of some connection that he had, something that he was working through, if you like, on the inner plane, connected with the process of the war. And at the point where the war ended, there was a date when, following the actual surrender of Japan, when American soldiers actually touched down on American soil to begin a kind of occupation. It was on this day that he died. You know, he pretty much linked himself up with the entire kind of course of the war. Now, this is absolutely bizarre, there's no doubt about it, but it gives you a sense of the weird territory that we're entering into. Now, here's someone who's a lot more famous, you know, whose work is enduring, Sri Aurobindo. Aurobindo had started out as a freedom fighter for Indian independence, but he withdrew into this mystical zone where he pretty much did bugger all. He scarcely moved out of one room for like decades whilst this awesome, you know, yogic process went through him, and he, to his own belief, anchored divine light in the world, a particular quality of divine light for the first time. And what's really intriguing about him, because yeah, he's educated in the West, but he's steeped in Hinduism, and everything that he talks about is just suffused with it. But he was acting with a partner, a woman called Mira Alfasser, who became known as the Mother or Sweet Mother. And she was absolutely steeped in Western occultism. She had hung around in Egypt and in France and been in close contact with a guy called Max Thiel. The kind of occultism that you find, you know, broadly in the Golden Dawn and Crowley, but with a distinctly kind of European French flavour to it. She was absolutely steeped in it, and she worked, you know, that it was considered by their devotees that she and Aurobindo were essentially one thing. They were one unit. They acted as a complete unity, and we know, you know, that the work that's been done. Look, the hell at this place, you know, the dome at Auroville. The Mother was behind the esoteric design of what's possibly the most elaborate temple that's been constructed on the planet, you know, in a really long time. you know, since the time of the Gothic cathedrals in Angkor Wat, really. This thing is a real beam me up Scottish scenario, there's no doubt about it. In the middle of it there is this crystal, and there's this little point in the top where the sunlight comes down and hits the crystal. The whole place is the centre of an enormous new community called Aurobindo that's been built out there to the most. This is a model of the immediate environs of the dome. You know, the thing has been built to the most elaborate specifications. And if you look into the details of it, some of you might be familiar with John Major Jenkins' book Galactic Alignment. He's got a nice little chapter on the construction of this place and what it means. And in fact, you know, there are theories that because when they constructed this, there was some ever so slight deviations from the really, you know, seriously detailed design that have been come up with. And because this is a cosmic temple that literally affects the nature of the world, that there have been earthquakes and floods and famines in India solely on the basis of the fact that they might have used the wrong bit of building material, or, you know, 1 square foot of it or something's a millimetre out. It's just an amazing way to think of things. So it's extraordinary to think that somebody, you know, this community, that someone like the mother who's involved in something like this, tells a story of her direct involvement in a spiritual way on the inner planes, if you like, at a crucial point in the Second World War. It wasn't until some time after the events that she started talking about it. She claimed that she was aware of some demonic force, some vast demonic force that was behind Hitler, and that she was able to kind of put this thing off and impersonate it and trick Hitler into invading Russia and thereby losing the war. You know, this is a story that she put out. Now, I've got to say that I find this story incredibly dubious. You know, I really, for a lot of reasons, I don't buy it, but it has to be reported in a presentation like this. First of all, as a long-term student of history, you know, the history of Hitler and the Nazi period, it's clear to me that Hitler intended to attack Russia pretty much from day one. It's not something that he suddenly decided to do about a month before it happened. You know, the logistics of the thing were gigantic. It was already being set in motion at the time of the Battle of Britain, and so on. But beyond that, what kind of a result is it for spiritual forces when you trigger off a war that is one of the most brutal in all of history, that, according to at least some estimates, I know not everybody believes the Russians, but, you know, 25 million people died. The intensification of the genocide of the Jews undoubtedly ups as a result of the invasion of Russia. It's a complete catastrophe right across the board, and the reverberations of it go on probably to the present day. If you're going to bring in spiritual forces to trick Hitler into doing something that makes him lose the war, it doesn't seem a very good idea to do something that results in tens of millions more people dying. So I'm not so sure about that at all. But on the other hand, you know, I have total respect for Aurobindo and the mother, but there is something about the tone of all of this that doesn't quite work for me. However, when we come to this chap, this infinitely enigmatic being, there's a far more complicated story here that I resonate with deeply. Meher Baba, you know, what do we know about him? He never said bugger all for 44 years. Well, that makes it pretty damn strange for starters. How did I get into it? Like a lot of people, it started right there. If you look on the back cover of the Who's legendary rock opera Tommy, the original album version, there is actually a tiny little credit avatar on Meher Baba. And I'm the kind of person, you know, rock and roll, rock music was a door in the wall for me back in the 70s. if I knew that the people whose music I loved were into particular things, I followed it up. You know, on the one hand, that led me via Jimmy Page to Aleister Crowley. It led me from the Beatles to TM. I followed up everything I ever knew Jim Morrison had ever read, and I followed up Meher Baba because of Pete Townsend. And indeed, Townsend, I think it was in 1971, did a solo album that's got a couple of tracks that are later done by The Who. I don't know if you can see there, he's got a badge on his boiler suit that has got a picture of Meher Baba on it. You know, Townsend was serious about Meher Baba, and he still is. You know, he still is into Meher Baba, and he still, you know, will promote certain things and put a little bit of money into things that Meher Baba groupings are doing. This is an advert for the album at the time, which makes it pretty obvious where he's at with everything. So Meher Baba, you know, infinitely mysterious, doesn't say anything for 44 years. People think he's good. How does a guy like this get going? Well, he's born in 1894 in Poon, what's now Poon, but I'm going to call it Poon most of the way through this because that's how I've known it over the years. And he's born into a Zoroastrian family, and I think, you know, along with Freddie Mercury, he's probably the most untypical Zoroastrian that you could really imagine, although you will find certain elements of that faith percolating through. When he's a young boy, in his teens, he notices a weird old woman who's just sitting in the middle of like a roundabout in the midst of some traffic by a tree. People reckon she's over 100 years old. Her name's Hazrat Babajan. She's a crazy saint. There are all kinds of stories about her. You know, that she'd been born into an aristocratic background, that she'd left her family, that she'd travelled about for decades in search of holy men, that she'd achieved some kind of enlightenment. There's even an absolutely crazy story about some soldiers who got really annoyed with her and beat her up and buried her alive, and then a few months later they were freaked out, something chronic, when they saw her walking about in another town. You don't know what to make of these stories. It's the flavour of India, basically. But she sees the young Meher Baba, and he clocks her, and one day she beckons him over and she kisses him on the forehead. You know, this is absolutely classic stuff. And from that point on, he comes every evening to just sit with her and talk to her. And after just over 6 months of this, she suddenly announces that he is some extraordinary being who is going to have a massive impact on the world. And there's something about the power that she puts into this, something about whatever's going on. You know, this kiss on the forehead finally kicks in, because Meher Baba's brain pretty much explodes, and he goes into a classic bit of Kundalini madness, really, that goes on for months and months and months and months. You know, he's feeling like electric shocks are going through his body, he's not eating properly, he's not sleeping properly. At some point he's just banging his head against the wall, he's running around, he's in a state of total turmoil. By most people's standards, he's barking mad. During this period of time, he actually turns up at Narayan Maharaj's ashram, and he's in a state of confusion, and Narayan Maharaj spots him, beckons him over, gives up his silver throne, lets him sit on the silver throne and puts golden flowers over him, and kind of says, you know, yo, and then Meher Baba just staggers off again into the wilderness. And he makes up with this guy. You know, it's pretty clear this guy's a bit on the intense side, right? Upasani Baba, Upasani Maharaj. He's another one of these absolutely crazy-ass mofos who makes no sense in any conventional way, but is packing this incredible power. He's lived in the wilderness, he's had periods where he's kind of starving himself. To all intents and purposes, he's mad, but somehow he keeps it all together. And there comes a point where in 1915, again the young Meher Baba comes into his presence. Upasani Maharaj gets a stone, throws it at Baba and it hits him right on the forehead, right where Hazrat Babajan has kissed him, and it hits him powerfully enough to draw blood from it. And he ushers him into his presence, and they spend 2 days alone together. And who knows what the hell goes on? But this is the beginning of kind of the anchoring of this turmoil. Not the complete end of it, but it's the beginning of the anchoring of this turmoil. And he tells me, Baba, you know, you are the ancient one. You are, you know, some kind of divine being. And again, it's a measure of how crazy Baba was. He ends up shutting himself up in this tiny little cage and just fasting virtually unto death for sort of months and months on end. And then Baba comes back in 1921. They spend 6 months together. With this, he's pretty much set up to go out and function as a guru in his own right. This is him in early Frank Zappa mode, around about 1923. He's beginning to draw people around himself. And it's during this period, you know, in July 1925, he announces, I'm going to go into a period of silence. Nobody can remotely conceive of the fact that it's going to last 44 years and he's never going to say another word. But this is what happens, basically. And he goes off, you know, he sets up a little ashram, a modest community in India, and they're very ascetic and they're very disciplined, they live very frugally. But he also goes on world tours. He loves to just travel about. And part of the mysterious thing that he likes to do, he likes to just be driven through, you know, big cities where there are huge crowds. He just wants to be in the middle of the life of the world at the same time. And, you know, this is him in America, in Hollywood, with the actress Tallulah Bankhead, who, it's interesting, she's a right hardcore case, you know, real sex and drugs and rock and roll 1931 style. He's hanging out with people like this, and it's during the same period of time, in 1931, that he comes here to Glastonbury, and by this stage he's developed this utterly bizarre way of communicating that has been, you know, a real stumbling block for a lot of people. It was a stumbling block at the time. He had an alphabet board and he would just point to the letters with a rapidity that today's modern mobile phone texters would be, you know, impressed by. And he had people that were kind of his immediate devotees who seemed to kind of understand what he was getting at just through a little, you know, a hand gesture or raised eyebrow. And you see, there's a lot of film footage of this on YouTube, and it's pretty damn weird. He's really going very, very fast, and the people with him are just, oh yeah, and all this great teaching, and you think, hang on, how is that happening that quickly? It's all pretty damn strange, and it's in this context that he passes through Britain in 1931. There are some slightly different versions of this, but the version I'll take is that he did visit the Chalice Gardens, and what I love to think is that maybe, you know, as he was on his way there, maybe D.L. Fortune was doing a bit of gardening, and he sort of looked up and thought, wow, who's this? You know, that's a nice thing to contemplate. If you want to find out about the whole of his life, this is a great little book. Because for all the complete weirdness, for all the strangeness of Fall, what you ultimately get from reading about his life is the sense of complete service to humanity that he engaged in, and the amount of sheer physical effort that he put into what he was doing. But the core of the topic tonight is covered in this very strange book, The Wayfarers, with the God Intoxicated, the Masts. A huge period of time, 13 years, from 1936 to 1949 of Baba's work. So a period that takes in the whole of the Second World War, the atom bomb, the independence and partition of India, the whole Cold War Iron Curtain thing coming in, the Chinese Revolution, massive stuff. Bubba is completely given over to working with people that he calls masts. These guys, masts is taken to mean overpowered. They are effectively, again, from our conventional standards, they're nutters. These are people that seem as if they are just, low-level mental illness, shall we say, for want of better terminology. Guys that are living in toilets, people that are living on the street, people that are... There's a great anecdote of somebody that just sets themselves up on a veranda next to somebody's house, and the owners of the house, because this is a totally different culture, this is the great thing about that culture, that it will support this kind of manifestation. The people in the house were kind of honoured to have this holy nutcase living outside and sort of made a little shelter for them, and made sure that they were all right. Bubba went out of his way, travelled the length and breadth of India repeatedly, looking for these people. And, he had his own criteria that was very inscrutable, very unknowable as to what they were all about. On one occasion, he turned up at the famous gathering of Kumbh Mela, the largest gathering of people on the planet. Millions of people there, all manner of fakirs and ascetics, weird dudes doing the strangest stuff. And yet, in all that gathering, even as he got there, there was just a couple of guys he was looking for. And somehow he found them. And, he sent out advance parties as well. When he found them, he would take tremendous care of them. He would wash them. Some of these guys hadn't had a bath in centuries. Their clothes were like peeled off them. And they kind of knew what was coming. They seemed to have full knowledge of him, that they'd be, some guy had just been sitting in a pile of rubbish by the side of the road, and then Bubba would come round the corner, and this guy would just scarp as if to say, oh no, he's here, as if they were somehow waiting for him. And what he'd do is he'd get them all together, and then having bathed them, he made these camps, little ashrams, mini ashrams of these mats, and he'd maybe spend, just as a Vasani Barbara had done with him, they'd be, 2 hours in seclusion together, and you just didn't know what was happening. And then they'd come out and they'd just pour in with sweat. And there's a great story about one of these guys. The door was opened by one of Bubba's assistants, and one of these masts just brushed past him. It was like getting an electric shock that nearly knocked him off his feet. So it's very, very mysterious what it is he thinks he's doing. And there's one particular case. This is a guy called Chatty Bubba, which is possibly the most illustrative case of all. Now, he's a crazy guy. In cold weather, he would just pour water all over his bedding and just sit on it, And there was an occasion where there was a hailstorm where the temperatures were so low that it took 4 days for the hailstones to melt. And he just went out between 4 o'clock in the morning and sat stripped to the waist in the middle of all of this. And Bubba gets him, and he reluctantly persuades him to let him bathe him, but there is no way that he will let anyone dry his hair. He's got a real thing about it. Just don't touch the hair, mate. And he would grab handfuls of earth and throw them at Bubba if he tried to, dry his hair. So again, he's a nutter, but this guy Greg Rosen's done some paintings of some of these masks. This is Chatty Bubba. We get to the time that the war's breaking out, and Chatty Bubba starts, he doesn't want to eat anything because it's March 1940 and he thinks that something big is about to kick off. And then when Germany invades France in May, he starts saying, something really bad is going on in Europe, but ultimately they're going to be all right. Now the thing to remember is, these guys are not, looking at the TV news, checking in on the internet on a moment-to-moment basis about what's going on. They're not that well informed about what is going on right across the world. You know, their brother might be getting a little bit of information, but these crazy people in their huts, they're not taking any of this on board. But in June 1940, when France is on the verge of surrender, he just starts going crazy. He gets violent and shouting and abusive, and he goes to my brother begging for shelter, saying that his home has been destroyed and, you know, help me please. And again, they're left alone together. And what Baba comes out and communicates is that somehow or another this guy is intimately connected with what is going on in France, you know, and that when he works with him, so he too somehow becomes intimately connected with what's going on. Now, don't ask me how that works. Don't ask me to say, well, this is the doodah, the diuja and whatnot, because of the blah, blah, blah. I haven't got a clue what all this is. It's divine madness. But this is what was going on during that period of time. You can believe it or not believe it. But these guys are ultimately fascinating. So because I've got the interest in the occult war, the deal fortune side of things, and because I've become interested in Mir Baba, when I read Much Silence in the early 90s, I was fascinated by it. Now when it gets to the end of 1994, you know, I said a little bit in my Southend Glastonbury Cremation Ground Mandala presentation about the kind of stuff that started happening to me when I did second degree Reiki. Well, by the time we got to the end of 94, I had been set up with the option of doing a Reiki Master scenario in Glastonbury in January 1995, and I've always noted that when something spiritually big is set up, more or less the moment it's set up, it activates something and a whole bunch of stuff starts just pulling you towards it. Now this was a period of time when, you know, I was doing an awful lot of yoga. I was trying to just generally purify my karmas, and I've mentioned in one of my other presentations that I had a phase where I had got the Alistair Crowley Thoth Tarot trumps and got them all blown up to A5 and a laser colour copier, and I've got a gallery of the 22 in my hallway. It's absolutely awesome. And that had been up for years, but at this point I thought it's time for a change now. It's time for something else. So I conceived of the Guru Gallery, you know, the spiritual figures. And I was going to have Buddha and JC and Babaji and Papasan and Blavatsky and Gurdjieff and Crowley and Mother Meera and Osho and everybody. And I was going to have Mir Baba. And I managed to find decent pictures of all these people and got the whole lot up in pretty much the order of their birth as much as you could. And there's one missing space in the middle for Mir Baba, and I knew what I wanted to do. There was a picture of him that was on the cover of a book of discourses that was absolutely lush, and a mate of mine had a copy of this book. I thought I'd borrow it off him, I'll photocopy it. That seemed to be, you know, sufficient to explain it all. And I started thinking about, you know, Usui Sensei, the founder of Reiki, getting the whole vibe. I painted the whole of the hall white. You know, I had a big Shiva statue up there. It started to get pretty groovy as we were going on towards it. Now, another one of the things that I mentioned in one of my previous presentations was the guy that, you don't have to know about this if you haven't heard this story, but there was a guy who turned me into a dolphin in Glastonbury. I'll say that much about him. And he had got this numerology thing going on. And he kept talking about the number 33. Now, I just had never resonated with numerology other than in the context of gematria, you know, like in the Hebrew and the Greek, where each letter has got a numerical equivalent and, you know, particular words and sentences and so on. they have significance, and there's a whole thing in the Kabbalah with this. I was up for that, but the usual sort of numerology that you find, fortune telling, New Age stuff, just did not do it for me at all. But after I've been blasted by this guy and his transmission, and he's going to about 33, for some reason I thought about my own birthday, which is the 5th of April 1959. Now, 5 plus 4 plus 1 plus 9 plus 5 plus 9 is 33. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of interesting. I'm going to play games with this. Let's see if we can get anything interesting going on with this. So because that was the 1990s, you would get a sequence of 33 days still. So what I took to doing, if there was something maybe that needed doing that was interesting, that I was pressing a button hoping for future results, if I realised, there's a 33 day in 4 days time, I'd wait for that before I did it. And the big result that I got from it was, I was working in civil service, and they were offering up a form of redundancy pay, which they call flexible early severance. And I knew that if I did it, based on how many years I've been there, the amount of money that I would get from it would be enough for me to make the leap and move here and just about survive for a short while. So I put in for it, and I put in for it on a 33 day. So once you've done that, what comes back at you is out of your conscious control, of course it is. And yet the result that came back to me, the message in my inbox telling me that I'd been accepted for it and I'd got it, was on the next 33 day. So I thought, all right then, this is nice. And this was November. This was November 1994. And I clocked at that point that Christmas Day was going to be a 33 day. And I thought, what the hell can possibly happen on Christmas Day that in any way justifies all this weirdness? It's going to have to be pretty cool for me to say, all right, here's another result. I've already had a brilliant result with this redundancy pay thing, but let's just see. I'm up for it. So this is my father, way back in the early 1940s, when he's a soldier. Okay, so guess what? I've got some father stuff. Anybody got some father stuff? My father stuff comes about as a result of what happened to him in the Second World War. He was wounded at the Battle of Kohima, fighting the Japanese, suffered, bad health in his lungs, recurring bronchitis, all kinds of stuff. He was not a very physically dynamic person. Worst of all, he was still waking up screaming with nightmares that there were Japanese soldiers in the kitchen 50 years later. I remember as a young boy, he'd been out in Burma in the jungle in the monsoon season for about 3 or 4 years on the trot. And, that's a bit of a bummer anyway, but if at some point some, maniacal Japanese soldier is about to burst through with a bayonet, someone with the attitude of, the greatest high they could possibly have would be to get killed for their emperor at that point. There's a little bit of a fear factor in there. So decades later, if there was a thunderstorm, if it was heavy rain, he got really uncomfortable about it. It was absolutely extraordinary. And I knew a little bit about the circumstance of how he'd been wounded. There had been an occasion where the British and the Japanese had squared off against each other over literally the area of a tennis court. They're down one end of it and the Japanese are down the other. That's not much of a distance. And these guys the Japanese that he's facing are members of the Imperial Guard. So they're not little guys. There's this kind of cliche that the Japanese are little guys. These are all guys that are 6 foot tall or more, and they've all got thick great swords. And they're, it's the old screaming banzai coming straight at you, and they literally do not care whether you kill them or not. They're just completely and utterly into it. And in the process of all this, somebody lobs a grenade, he gets wounded, and in the process of trying to extricate him later, he's on a stretcher, they've got the Red Cross flag, but the Japanese are still firing at him. So, you know, I knew a certain amount about all this, you know, and in certain respects, the fact that my father was like he was, probably was a partial factor in me turning out like I was. I turned out like a weirdo, because if he'd have been a little bit more strong and dynamic in certain respects, I might not have gone so quite off the rails in other respects. But did I go off the rails? We'll see. But at the end of 1994, the classic TV documentary series, The World at War, I mean, I don't know how many times I've screened it on the Freeview History Channel now. I don't know how many times, I dread to think how many times I've seen it, but on that occasion at the end of 1994, I'd committed myself for whatever reason. I was going to watch every single episode. I do this sometimes. And a couple of weeks before Christmas, they'd had the whole thing on the Burmese campaign. And it's not like I hadn't seen it before, but there was something about it that seemed a lot more vivid. That in fact, what I hadn't clocked was that where my father had been wounded at Kohima, that was in India, that wasn't in Burma. The Japanese had effectively invaded India. They didn't get very far in there, but that was where Kohima was, you know, and that was where some major battles had occurred there that were a turning point, and the Japanese were ultimately defeated and turned back. Now, a few years back, in 2014, I was looking through my father's stuff, and I'd realised that he'd been wounded on the 28th of April 1944, and I thought I would, you know, I did a blog post that acknowledged it on that date, and I read this book about Kohima. It's an absolutely extraordinary book. God damn it, that battle was intense, man. That was Apocalypse Now type scenario that he was in the middle of. It was serious business. So, you know, this is like, again, just a picture of someone wounded, and you know, I started to sort of think of my father in exactly the same kind of circumstance, and this was all that was left of a hillside after there had just been this ebb and flow. So I had, you know, an increasing sense, and the thing was, like so many of that generation, he had never really talked about it. It was obvious that it messed him up big time. I mean, it was very, very sad when, after decades, you know, these nightmares, when he got into his 70s, these nightmares got worse and worse, and he was flailing about with his arms and legs, and like, you know, kicking and hitting my poor mother. They had to end up getting single beds after like decades of sleeping together, which I thought was really sad. And on one occasion, he flung himself out of bed and smashed the whole side of his face in and nearly really badly damaged his eye. So this was kind of getting worse as he was getting older. You know, there was a really big process going on there, but he never talked about it. So it's Christmas Day, 1994, you know, 33 day. Now here's the deal with me and Christmas Day with my parents at that time. Okay, you know, they're in their 70s, my mum goes to church. They had a lot of trouble dealing with my involvement in things like psychic questing, or you know, oh mum, I've just done a rebirthing session on my birthday and I think I was reborn on the floor, you know. You got kind of, it's difficult, and like my father had a low threshold of acceptance before he got twitchy about stuff. So it used to be, right, we got, you know, I would get the Christmas Radio Times, the minute it got out, and I'd look Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day. I would spend, you know, 3 or 4 days with them, and it's like, can we do, you know, 12 hours of just solid stuff that we're watching on that telly? Is there going to be a moment where we're just going to be stuck and we're going to have to talk to each other? And it was kind of, you know, it was all right. It sounds terrible, but it was actually all right if we just sat there and watched some silly film together. It was all right. But it's Christmas Day morning, and the mum's in the kitchen getting the dinner together, and it's, no, I can't possibly watch a Disney movie, The Black Hole, can I? You know, you can't do that. You're going to have to talk to your dad, aren't you? You know, going to have to give it a go. And I said to him, been watching the World at War again, saw the one on Burma a couple of weeks ago. And then suddenly, out it all comes. And this really was, it's still the most astonishing time for me of any Christmas day that I've ever had, really. It was on another level of the game altogether. I knew he'd been in India. I didn't know that he'd been in Pune in 1942. So I took Osho sannyas in 1992, 50 years later. And I thought to myself, what are the chances that somehow or another he went by the famous ashram, might have just driven past it, or might have even walked past it, or just been in the vicinity of it, 50 years beforehand. And of course also, the thing is, this is also where my brother's been brought up. This is also where Hazrat Babajan has sat, on the little roundabout by a tree, and he's had his kiss on the forehead. What if he was somehow in the vicinity of that? He wouldn't have known anything about it, but what if he was 50 years before? That was kind of strange. Now, here's the thing that is such to me, an interesting issue. My father was not untypical of the soldiers that he was with at the time. He's in India, but he thought he hated it. He just completely hated it. He saw the flickering Taj Mahal by moonlight and didn't rate it. Okay, he's a young bloke in his early 20s, who's from Shepherd's Bush, who is, thousands of miles from home, waiting to go in a jungle and potentially be killed by some bunch of maniacs, or maybe captured by them and horribly tortured. So, I can understand that your emotional consciousness gets a little bit warped out by circumstances like that. Other people respond differently, but, and he hates the food, he wouldn't even think about eating the food. And, he had this casual conversation with me about how, him and his mates ended up having fights with the troops from Africa who were fighting for Britain. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, we just used to keep calling them Sambos. And he was like, oh my God, dang, no, shit, And you think to yourself, do I damn him for this? Do I damn that generation of people for that? But, that's how he was. But he did spend time in Calcutta, and he told me that he went sightseeing to various temples. I said, well, what temples? I don't know. No, of course he would know, but it meant nothing to him. But I thought to myself, I wonder if he went to the Dakshineswar Kali temple. God, what if he went there? What if he just was somewhere in the vicinity of the Dakshineswar Kali, Bhavantarani, the saviour of the world, that set off Ramakrishna and Vivekananda and the whole East-West transmission? What if he just set foot in there? Oh no, surely not. There's also a famous temple, Kalighat. Now, the thing about Kalighat, and this brings us into Calcutta and British soldiers in India even more so, is, Calcutta, the name is sometimes taken to derive from the name of Kali. I'm not so sure about that. Calcutta has got an awful lot of prostitutes, an awful lot of red light districts. And these women quite often are Kali devotees to a greater or lesser extent. They will have little picture of Kali in their place, or they'll have some little marking on their head that denotes they're devotees to Kali. Now, we know damn well from our study of the behaviour of British soldiers abroad that, these guys will have frequented the local prostitutes. There's no doubt about that at all. In fact, I think a number of you may be of an age to remember the sensational Alex Harvey band and the stupendous title track of their album Next that was legendarily performed on the Old Listen Test, I think in 1973, where Harvey sings about a national service brothel and his experience of losing his virginity in that, which was not the most fulfilling way for Christmas Day, man. You can't say to Dad, that's far out. Did you have sex with any of the prostitutes? Because they might have been Kali devotees. But I'm thinking, is it possible? Is it possible that some spiritual influence, if you like, some current, some transmission, can actually pass in such a manner down through him all those years ago and to me? And I've got to say, yeah, I think it can, but this is only the beginnings of how weird it gets. Because, my father was based, a little way away from Pune, was an army camp at a place called Naga. Now, it has a little bit of fame, if you like, in British literary studies, because Spike Milligan was actually born in that camp in 1917. Here's the story with it though. It had been a British army camp in the First World War, and then it was closed down, and a certain Mayor Baba took it over and made it the site of his first ashram. And then in the 20s, after he's taken his vow of silence, he leaves it, and then it becomes an army camp again. And I thought, and my dad's just free associating. And he said, one day, one of the officers said, I'm going off on a little wander out into the nearby hills. There's some Indian holy man living in a cave. Do you want to come along and have a look? And my dad said, yeah, okay, I'll come with you. I said, what? You've never told me that. I've been into yoga since 1969 when I was a 10, and you've never even mentioned that. And he said, well, I just didn't think anything of it, really. And I said, well, what happened then? So, him, this officer, and another guy, they go out into, the nearby hills, and in this cave is this archetypal yogi geezer, venerable type, long bushy beard, the works, my dad doesn't remember much about it, but it's like, some kind of blessing is given, and they depart. And, I thought to myself, if the average householder, goes to a yogic saint of some kind and is seeking blessings, what do they really want? They want to have secure material conditions. They want to have a good family. They maybe want to have, to raise a good family, whatever. He whatever he thought he was doing, he did seek out this guy, and he did get a blessing from him. And I turned out to be his son with all the kind of interests that I had at that point. And this made me think further into this. Because, my dad would have thought he was fighting for the British Empire, that he was fighting to defend Britain. But in real terms, the event where he was wounded, the event that was in many respects the defining event, the whole of his life, involved him defending India against an invasion. And I thought, this is deep shit, man. There is some past life stuff here that comes out of the epoch of the Mahabharata or something. What's going on here? What is this configuration of destiny here? He is entirely unconscious of it, and it's this is all happening in the 1940s, and we're now into the 1990s. And I'm just about weeks away from being initiated into the final sequence of a Japanese healing system. Now, the story that goes with Reiki, and a lot of these stories are quite difficult to entirely endorse, but the story as I was given it at the time was after Mikao Usui had kind of brought Reiki into the world in a form that we recognise, he handed it on to a guy called Chijiro Hayashi, And Hideyoshi was the man who initiated Walter Carter, who brought it to the United States and out into the world. Now, Hideyoshi was a Japanese naval man, and the story is that, you know, when he realised what was going to be happening, what the plans of the Japanese Navy were, and that war was imminent, he chose a kind of conscious death, some kind of weird yogic death. You know, he just pretty much just sat down in his room and died. And I thought, here I am. The Japanese, you know, essentially, like I say, the entire Japanese people, the war initiated by Japan, messed my father up for the whole of his life. And now he produced the weirdo who was about to be initiated into this Japanese healing system. So at this point, you know, this is when I get the final picture that completes the gallery of the gurus. You know, and then I also discovered that Mir Baba's tomb, Samadhi, is not that far away from where all this happened as well. So yeah, I went through the Reiki Master process, and it was, you know, absolutely epic. There's probably a whole lecture just went out to me in the 6 months after that, which ultimately led to me moving here. Well, I tuned my father and my mother to Reiki, and from that point on, every single time I saw them, you know, because once I moved here, I would only maybe see them every 3-6 months, something like that. And whenever I went back, I gave them a Reiki reattunement. And in fact, you know, the last interaction I ever had with my father, a matter of a couple of weeks before he died in 2002, was giving him a Reiki reattunement, you know, at Christmas time, 2001. So that whole process was absolutely epic. And in terms of, you know, the stuff that you have with your parents, you know, the blah, blah, blah that you might have with your father, to say that that was outshined and transcended by that sequence of events is an understatement. You know, I was placed on another level of emotional perception altogether by that. And that's not to say that, you know, I still, even now, he's been dead since 2002, only a couple of weeks ago I had a dream where I was just shouting my head off at him. You know, I'm not to say that none of that still goes on, but it's not kind of binding. Something like that is just outshined completely in all of this. But that's not the end of the weirdness for the Western family, you know. Here's a family picture from the summer of 1939. My dad's sitting on the extreme front left. On the back, on the extreme right, is his brother Bert. Now, his brother Bert signed up for the army, young family, got a little kiddie, got a son called Edward, not that old. He gets taken off Singapore, early 1942 now. Unless you're kind of a bit of a Second World War buff, I think a lot of people have this sense that after the Battle of Britain it was all hunky-dory, and you know, we staved off invasion, we were on the up and up slowly after that. But in fact, the fall of Singapore is the biggest military disaster in the entire history of the British Armed Forces. It was epically catastrophic, and many people consider it to effectively represent the end of the British Empire. From that point on, there's no way the British Empire was ever going to survive. And it was the sheer stupidity of it, because Singapore, you know, naval base right on the end of the peninsula, and it's got humongous fortifications pointing out to sea. You know, it could have withstood a massive D-Day level assault from sea, probably quite easily. But in the landwards direction, the assumption is, you know, down through the Malaysian peninsula, where it's all jungle, no one's ever going to get through there. Now, I don't know to what extent anybody ever tested out that theory, because it was catastrophically wrong. The Japanese just came through there, no problem at all, and stayed in there. Appalling atrocities were committed, and an awful lot of British soldiers were taken prisoner and ended up on the infamous Death Railway. And you know, my uncle Bert was one of those people. He never came back, you know, and this was a big thing for my father. You know, he'd got his own experiences all the way through. My father would never own any Japanese goods, absolutely no way. And in those days, you know, in Southeast Essex, there's not that many Oriental type people about. If he saw, you know, he used to work in Southend, if he saw anybody, they might have just been the owner of a Chinese restaurant, but he just had this archetype. He would cross the road, he could not, the horror of it and everything was just that massive. So there's this, you know, this whole thing with Edward has lost my cousin Edward has lost his father in this world historical event, the fall of Singapore, a massive event in the story of the British Empire. But, you know, he gets on with his life, he gets married, he has a couple of kids, and we get these Christmas cards, you know, that give you, you know, a little round robin letter that says, you know, and now young so-and-so is doing this, that and the other, and we get to hear how these kids are growing up. This one's doing pretty well for himself. He's got a job in a finance company and he's working in one of the Twin Trade Towers in New York. He's looking pretty good there. On the morning, 9/11, he's booked a day off to do a round of golf. So, my cousin Edward, his father has been taken from him as the result of some gigantic world historical process, the fall of Singapore. His son has been saved from being killed in a random, apparently, you know, the world historical process that just eats people up, you know, regardless of their individual karma. Just to really lay it on thick, this guy, the son who survived 9/11, was in London visiting, you know, the parent company or the associate company or whatever, and was on the London Underground on the morning of the 7th of July 2005. He was actually on an underground train at the time that the bomb went off on another train under the ground there. But he was nowhere in the vicinity and he wasn't injured. Now, how strange a combination of events is all that? What the hell is going on here? You know, when people talk about karma, when people talk about, you know, the connections, for example, I think between Britain and India are absolutely fascinating. You know, we've become conditioned by all this kind of disgusting monarchy as to our sense of the British in India. You know, that it's all a bit flipping grotesque. And yet, you know, as a result of the British being in India, Buddhism, which has been considerably neglected, the archaeology around Buddhism, the whole thing around sites associated with Buddha, all of that changes. You know, the modern revival of Buddhism in this world owes an awful lot to the presence of the British in India during that time. This bloke, you know, he's looking pretty dapper, isn't he? He's an Indian, a lawyer in London in 1906. Gets given by a theosophist a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, goes back home, changes the attire, swaps the suit for a loincloth, and the rest is history, Mahatma Gandhi. So it's all very flipping mysterious. You know, I have the sense that my father, you know, absorbed and transmitted an influence entirely unconsciously. You know, something immense is also going on with his brother and that whole timeline. And it just, you know, with me it's been very clear, but I'm absolutely convinced that versions of this kind of thing are probably happening in loads of family cases. But there is something absolutely mysterious going on here. You know, my dad and his mates, they were racist, they were sexist, they had no conscious interest in Indian culture, they detested it, but they still put their lives on the line defending India. It doesn't mean they weren't brave, it didn't mean that they didn't give up the best years of their life. There's a higher kind of perspective on this, you know. And the thing that I love about Baba in his whole life is it completely resists any intellectual attempts to make sense of it. And everything that's, you know, happened to me around this, the whole mystery of my father in India, what that means, his family and so on and so forth, if you try and get a mental formulation that somehow, you know, dots the I's and crosses the T's and makes rational sense about it, it's not going to happen. It's something that you have to kind of come, it's an emotional apprehension that is what matters here. And that's why I think these crazy people, these wild holy beings, they're not, you know, asking you to visualise in great detail teensy-weensy little things going on in your chakras and then move the colours up to here and then you've got, you know, look at this little syllable and create this whole enormous great inner world. That's not the game they were remotely doing. And yet look at the immensity of what this whole story represents. You know, I like it when the divine is crazy because life is crazy and there are a whole bunch of things that you can't make sense of, but there is a symmetry there. There is an extraordinary symmetry there, and at the point where you are meant to understand, at the point where you are, you know, meant to move forward into a higher realm of perception with it, somehow it does itself. You know, I was playing these games for the 33 days. A certain amount of things were in motion that I was consciously doing. But what came back at me was a zillion times more than that. And one day, you know, I don't know how I'll do it, but it would be nice to think. I'd love to get out there. I would love to investigate and find out who this venerable yogi up in the hills my father had been to see. Because think about it, he's in the vicinity of Mir Baba. You know, Mir Baba is a bloke that knows everything about all these guys. He's got his radar attuned to people the length and breadth of India. If there is some holy man in a cave in his domain, he's going to know that person is, and that person's going to know Baba is. The chances are very high that whoever this guy was my dad went to see, he would have had some time with Mir Baba. I put money on that. So you simply have to ask yourself, you know, how that all works. Now, I don't, you know, Mir Baba, he's got his devotees who say he's an avatar, he's a divine incarnation, he's the ancient one. I get uncomfortable with that sort of stuff because there are other dudes packing mega power who have exactly the same stuff said about them. And I don't like to get into this comparison and contrasting. And, well, this is the categorisation of how so-and-so's realisation is in comparison and they reach the state of the blah, blah, blah. I'm way past giving shit about any of that sort of stuff anymore. What I will simply say is Mir Baba is awesome and I flipping love him. And that, you know, with all of that, I commend this to you as the Gurus in the Second World War, which is